Okay. We want to start out by recognizing that the Clay Studio stands on the indigenous territory known as Lenapehoking, the traditional homelands of the Lenni Lenape people. And we'd like to take a moment to reflect on the role of the Lenape as the past, present, and future stewards of the land, and the role of all of us to join in their tradition of respect and caring for the land and each other. So I'm excited to introduce Yael Braha. Yael is a ceramic artist of North African descent who applies her formal studies in graphic design and cinema to ceramics. In 2021, she received the Multicultural Fellowship Award from the National Council on Education for the Ceramic Arts. Her work has been exhibited in museums and art galleries in the US and Japan and as part of permanent collections in the US. She's been a ceramic artist in residence in the United States at Arrowmount, Watershed, Haystack, and Starworks, and also in Japan. And currently, Yael is a resident at Craft Contemporary in Pittsburgh. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So I should also mention that Yael is the featured artist in our shop for last month and this month. And that was due to the really wonderful curating of Naima Stith, who is our retail manager and gallery coordinator and is sitting next to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Naima.
And just couldn't stop talking about how amazing Yael is as a person and her work. So thanks for that collaboration. Yeah. I'm going to start with my question that I ask everyone, which is how and why did you make the brave decision to make your life in art?
Thank you for that question. It's a difficult question to answer, but I think it's been part of my DNA since the very beginning. Just to give a little bit of context, I grew up in Italy, and in Italy, you have to decide which high school you need to attend, and they're all very specialized, artistic and scientific and classic, and I really wanted to go to the artistic, and circumstances, aka my parents, didn't allow me to go, so I ended up going to a scientific high school. So I ended up learning Latin, which I have to say still has proven to be useful to a certain extent. But right after I graduated from high school, I really still had that impetus and that passion that continued to draw me towards the art. And I think my first love, it was graphic design. And so immediately I enrolled into a degree studying graphic design and visual arts. And from then on, it's just been continuing to follow my curiosity, frankly, and passion. And I'll take you on a little bit through a little presentation that I prepared. But from there, I continued on to filmmaking, sculpture, interactive media, and then eventually, later on, I discovered the wonderful world of clay, and I think I'm gonna be here for a while.
We hope so too. When you think about that time when you knew you wanted to go to art high school, why do you think that is? Like a little bit maybe before that, what was it that the first time that you felt joy in making art, or what did you do as a kid that made you know you wanted to pursue art?
I think the biggest influence has been my mother in my upbringing. There's always been this particular attention to noticing in everyday life. It didn't really have to be anything special or particular, but just like noticing what was around us. It could have been a flower, it could have been like a ladybug, it could have been like a particular sensorial experience. And then I remember we did all sorts of crafts activity from nothing, like from either like seashell or pasta shells or anything. But it was just, I think it really influenced me in being able to switch my gaze and my point of view to actually notice what is around me and actually getting enjoyment from that and being able to process that and not just bypassing that.
I love that word, noticing. I think that that's a really important thing that is common. Artists are people who are looking and like taking their cues from the visual world around them, but all of us can be more connected and joyful if we stop and look and at any beautiful thing that we see around us. I also have to note that you said your mother. So when I like pushed you for that earlier moment, and I've started noticing over the last few months when I do these planned conversations that if I push, people often say, well, my mother. I don't know. I just think that's interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't think I would be doing anything that I'm doing today if it wasn't from her, not only influence in the noticing, but also the encouragement and support. Yeah, unfortunately, my mom is no longer alive, so I can just like remember her influence and be grateful for that.
Yeah, that's important. Do you think that there was a difference? Well, there is a difference. What did you notice? Let's use that word again about when you moved from Italy to the US, sort of the attitude about artists and art making, and did you have a sense that there was something different here?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's that was the main reason why I moved to the US. And again, I think it might be counterintuitive. Everybody that I talk to, they think, why, what did you move? Like Rome? I was born in Rome. And of course, it's full of art and it's amazing. Absolutely. And wherever you walk, there's art. But I thought at that time, when I went for the first time, I went to the West Coast. I went to San Francisco to attend a graphic design conference, and I fell in love with the environment because it seemed to me that, excuse me, contemporary artists had so many opportunities to show their work, to exhibit their work, and there was a lot of progressive outlook in terms of art. I'll give a quick example to clarify. When I went to San Francisco, and there was, well, besides all the amazing experiences, there was a closing party of Keith Haring's show at the MoMA. And I went and it was amazing. It was like lighting, projection, live music. And I was like, me coming from Rome is like, this would never be possible at Museum of Modern Art. Maybe today, yes. But at that time, it was really completely blew my mind. And then the next day, the museum was open for admission to regular exhibits. So those are like those key experiences that really, how do you say, like they somehow it gave me a message like this is a place where, you know, there's a lot of opportunities. And for later on, when I ended up moving for thankfully to a graphic design job offer that I received, took care of the visa and everything, all the logistical matters that's related to that, I had the opportunity to continue to learn all the skills that I really was curious about. Metalwork, I never had a chance in Rome to learn anything about that, or glass casting, or so it's like education is it was very accessible to me from my point of view. Yeah.
No, that's good to hear. So I'm going to ask you about, you know, why you eventually transitioned to clay, but I'm also really interested in what brought you from graphic design to cinema. What was
Yeah.
You've gone through two different, well, probably more than two, but two big changes.
Right. Yes. So from graphic design, I was very curious in how to apply a static image and how can that translate into, and how could that acquire moving qualities. So how can I take a static image and apply some movement, and how can that evolve technically? Or what I was seeking, it was like kind of like animating graphics, which at that time it wasn't even, it was eventually later on it evolved into motion graphics, which is also a field that I ended up working in. But practically speaking, when I was in San Francisco, I got really interested in, by default, into filmmaking. So I was actually able to learn how to shoot actual film, celluloid, which is almost probably no longer available anymore, or how to shoot, how to edit. I ended up applying for MFA in cinema at San Francisco State, and I was one of the last cohort that actually ended up working with film. So the actual act of editing, to me, it was very influential. I think you can see that influence even in the ceramic work that I do today, like all of the cuts and the way that you juxtapose and create a tension between two shots to create a third meaning. And in my work, I have a lot of like slab assembly and overlapping. So in a way, it still resonates. The studies that I did still resonates in the work that I do today.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So I can ask why clay, but I feel like maybe is that part of your slides? Should we turn to your slides, or do you want to talk about your transition to clay first?
I could just give a nod. It just happened. So I think I mentioned curiosity and passion have always been like the biggest drive of my moving forward, which has been very fluid in my path. Um, and somehow clay wasn't a medium that I tried. I mean, probably if you take aside, elementary occasional clay class, but I just it was really a coincidence. I was seeking to learn a new skill, and I was living in Montreal, and I enrolled in a hand building workshop, and then the rest I can show you in the slides.
Great. Wonderful. I love that story of like people just say, and then I touched the clay, and then
Yes,
can't say anything
and then
more.
that's it. It's magic.
Great.
All right.
Okay, I'm gonna make it so you can share your screen. Okay, you should be good now.
Okay. Let me see. Can everybody
Yeah,
see? Okay.
perfect.
Fantastic. So, I guess as I mentioned, I was born in Italy, but I wanted to give just a little contextual background. My parents were born in Libya, in North Africa, in an Italian colony, and of Jewish descent, Jewish faith, in living in a context that at that time wasn't appropriate for them to live in. So they basically refugeed in the colonizer country. They ran for their life and they left everything and they landed in Italy. I was born there. And so let's say that I grew up in this multicultural family speaking a number of different languages, eating a lot of different variety of foods. And that has definitely influenced my upbringing. As I mentioned, in terms of art, I was going to school not too far away from Piazza Navona, which was definitely a feast for the eyes and soul, just to be able to walk around and seeing the sculpture of Bernini, Borromini, or walk into a church and see I don't know, all sorts of like amazing paintings. Definitely has really influenced and brightened my life there. I studied graphic design, and this was just like a quick experiment or a quick insight into typography and how we did a lot of work intentionally without the use of the computer. So we just really literally went to the old part of town in Rome and we took an impression of the Roman capital and then we built it. We built the geometry behind it, which was really, again, it really fueled my curiosity and interest. From Italy upon graduation, I as I mentioned, I tend to attend a graphic design conference in San Francisco. I fell in love. I tried to move back. I was able to. And from then on, I think it almost looked like this Pandora's box has opened. And I got interested in moving images. While I was attending MFA in cinema, I also was, trying to finance my studies while also like trying to survive. So I had a number of different jobs. One of them, it was this amazing museum. If you have a chance to visit, it's the Exploratorium in San Francisco. And I had an opportunity to work with a lot of amazing, talented artists, scientists. And at that time, I also started to volunteer for other artists, to help other artists to bring their work to life. These were ultra large sculptures by Michael Christian. I ended up learning and practicing how to weld and all the logistics associated with building large permanent or semi-permanent sculpture. Eventually, I gathered enough courage and skills that I built my own. This was a 12 by 12 by 12 foot sculpture that was installed in San Francisco. And I like to show this sculpture because I think this kind of embodies all of the skills that I had accumulated at that time. It's an interactive sculpture, so you can actually, people who visited it, you can see the little kiosk, they could push a button and record their wish. It was a wish tree, and the audio was recorded and analyzed in real time, and it was basically mapped or transformed into light that traveled through the tree and light up a wish on top of the tree. So it was a collaborative interactive sculpture, which give me a lot of satisfaction in seeing like the immediate reaction of people. I while I was working, I had a full-time job. It was really important for me to continue to pursue my own personal practice. So the tree was one. This was another personal project. It was real-time visuals in sync to live music of the Minneapolis Symphony, and it was amazing experience. Really nerve-wracking to perform live, but it was fantastic. And as I mentioned, to support my personal project, I really needed to have a full-time job. So this was a job, it was a creative, let's say, force behind this project that was projected on the United Nations building in anticipation of the climate march in 2014. A lot of stop motion. We did like, I remember it was like a lot of stop motion of like how the shells get acidifying through CO2, just mimicking what's happening in our environment. Eventually, I moved to Canada. I started working as a multimedia director. And again, I combined all those skills. So in this installation, public installation, you can see some of the metal skills, the lighting, and you can also start seeing some of the patterns that maybe you can recognize some of them or the influence in my ceramic work. So I was like working on so many different levels on the details of the installation that these were patterns that are designed to, let's say, wrap around some like this metal fire pit enclosure, while the background projection was actually in real time. It was interacting depending on the proximity of the people to the fire. And this was an installation in Japan where, again, I could dive into this for a half hour, but we don't have that much time. So I'm just gonna say this was like on the left is like more like the daytime view, and on the right is the how it transformed during the night. This was part of like a larger immersive walk-through installation in a forest, and this was a part of a chapter of a story that was being told through light, set design, and animation. And this was probably a large project that I work before switching completely to ceramic. It was creative directed this live show at Madison Square Garden, which I also like to point out. Everything that I do, there's always still some influence. Like these were on the right were patterns that were designed and created by basically a shower of water. So the water curtain was being dropped in front and behind the stage and illuminated. So it seems like there's this pattern everywhere I do. So at this point, like to ask myself the question that other people generally ask me is like, why are you doing ceramics right now? You've done a lot of different type of work, but to me, it does make sense. Like I mentioned before, everything that I've done in the past is kind of converging in a in the Yael way into ceramics. Like I think I'm drawing from all my past experience and pouring it into the work that I do today. This was me when I was living in Montreal a few years ago, and that's actually when I started. I found a used wheel, enrolled into a hand building workshop. I often travel back to the United States to learn and to attend workshops that were more readily available than where I used to live. I started being really curious about wood firing. I was mentored by Simon Levin for about 1 year during one of the many years of the pandemic. And I think I was very interested in the process. Like I played with fire a number of different times with like metal casting, and I think wood firing, there's a lot of different elements that I love about it. Eventually, like you mentioned, in 2021, it was a couple of years after I started hand building, I was awarded a multicultural fellowship, and that was really instrumental because it really gave me the confidence to continue to pursue my work. There's I do work in a couple of different fields, sculptural and functional. These are some samples of sculptural work that I've done. This was gas fired, and these pods were wood fired. And some experiment again in clay and metal. I like to compare the two. This was like, a few years. This was probably on the left. It was probably 2015, the metal sculpture that I showed in San Francisco, and this was in 2021. It was a much smaller. The one on the left, it was 12 feet. The one on the right is like 12 inches high. So regardless of the scale, I think there was still like interest in exploring that form. And functional work, there's definitely, because of my upbringing, I was definitely interested by, visual art, but in particular, optical art, which was like pretty prominent, let's say like a wave in 1960s. There were lots of different European artists that they had some amazing work. And I think the takeaway of optical art is using black and white work, but also using positive and foreground and background layers just to create this tension and juxtaposition of layers, but also to evoke some sort of movement through that. And these last sections are basically some of the work that I've started doing. So after completing my corporate/creative jobs, I basically dove in and started this unexpected nomadic path of going from residency to residency. So this was last summer. I spent the summer at Starworks in North Carolina. I used their local native clay. I also continue to love collaboration across departments. This was a collaboration with there's a glass department at Starworks, and Megan helped me creating this cloche for the ceramic bases that I did. And also Mac helped me to create this custom metal fittings for this tea party stand. And in terms of process, I like to show this photo because this was a workshop. Again, ceramics, I'm self-taught. I didn't have any formal training in ceramics. But so I've tried to learn as much as I could throughout these past years. This was a very instrumental workshop that I took with Jen Allen. And I think everything that I've learned in the past kind of applies to this process. And the reason being is when I work on large installation, I always need to do prototype and start prototyping small scales and do iteration, variation. Okay, V1, V2, V3. And in a way, how Jen explained this to us, to the students, it actually made a lot of sense. And also in terms of slab working. So on the left, you can see the little, not so appealing first visual sketch or based on my pen sketches. And then it evolved into this form, and then it evolved into this form, and then eventually this was a final finished form. So I think process, I love process, and I think I'm constantly inspired by it. There are some recent vases, which actually a newer version of them, it's on show in your gallery. These were vases that, excuse me, I did in Shigaraki when I was a resident there last year. And again, developing new forms, new patterns, and moving on to research and playful exploration. I love to try, make lots of mistakes. I think that's how we grow. This was like a workshop that I took with Elisa while I was a resident at Airmont. And she taught us how to create this two-part mold to create very thin casts. And I basically started with a 3D printed positive, created a two-part mold, and then I sandwiched the two parts, and then I took the cast piece and I shaped it onto a convex form. Didn't go that well. It broke. I'll have to spend some more time working on it. But again, there's still some like a lot of appeal. I experimented with photography printing on clay. I built my own exposure box. Again, another avenue of potential further exploration. This is primarily what I'm focusing on right now. I'm designing patterns. And I try a variety of different techniques. I laser cut patterns. I transfer. I create vinyl patterns with heat transfer to create basically screen printing. This is how it looks when it was a tray. When I started tiling the pattern, this is how on the right, it's how it looks when the pattern is embossed onto clay. And another approach, I really wanted to work on a wearable. This on the left, it was a visual research. I did a little prototype just with reeds and I modeled it. And then after I modeled it, I laser cut all different layers. And then I took one of those layers and I 3D printed it. And then I used it as a stamp to create one layer of this necklace yet to be completed. This is also another technique that I started. Again, it hasn't yielded the results that I'd like to, but I like to share some of the work in progress. So this was actually while I was in Japan, I had access to a really, really large plotter and some materials that I'm not even sure if they are available here, but I'm sure something similar might be available. But so I had this idea of doing like pattern onto pattern. So I, instead of working with the patterns with glazes or slip, I wanted to try to sandblast the pattern off of a pot that was already fired. So I created the pattern, I put it on the pot, as you can see here. I sandblasted it, and part of it worked out, but then the adhesive didn't work. I wasn't able to, let's say, fine tune the level of stickiness and the level of intensity of the sandblaster. Again, to be continued. This was a class that I taught at Aramont. Basically, I taught how to create a pattern. This was the pattern created by a student. So this was the original pattern. And then I taught how to make it tileable. And at NCICA, actually, Spas NCICA, I showed the digital version of it. So starting by hand, creating a single module of a pattern, and then eventually digitize it, modify it, and creating a larger digital pattern. And lastly, I'm very excited because, like, this is like a photo of a wild clay processing that I did a while ago, and I called it the Tower of Possibilities. There's so much potential with clay and with processes and discovery, and I think this is what keeps me. When I said, like, I'm gonna focus on clay for a while, hopefully, I'm very excited about all the potential and potential of this medium. And lastly, I just wanted to say I'm very grateful. I've been traveling for a couple of years now. I'm hoping that I will be able to continue to make this my full-time working artist profession. I'm not sure if that's gonna happen or not. I'm trying, but I think the biggest gift throughout this past couple of years is just really being able to meet so many wonderful people who have supported me and encouraged me along the way, and I've made some long-lasting friendships that I'm gonna cherish from now on. And I think that's it. If you have any question, that's my Instagram, my email, and my website. And I'm gonna stop sharing.
Excellent, wonderful. Thank you. That was great. I loved all your images. I'm sure that people have questions. I'm really interested to know if you feel like you'll ever be able to incorporate your interactive kind of large scale work with your ceramic pieces. Do you think about that?
I would love to. I think there's definitely been a lot of interest and a lot of ideas floating, a lot of sketches done. I think I'll need to find the right opportunity, the right place. A lot of these installations are site specific. So, um, who knows? Maybe if I find the right place or receive the right invitation, then I'm definitely interested in exploring some of those opportunities. Could be a lot of different possibilities.
Yeah, that's great. Do you want to talk a little bit more about your time in Japan? I know that you were so excited that you're going to go back. So
Yeah.
it's been amazing. Do you feel like there was one really big thing that you learned from that trip, or?
Mm, well, I think the besides the culture, that to me is very fascinating. I think it was instrumental being there because so the this amazing facility that has been around for I don't know, probably since I don't know, the 60s maybe. The Shigaraki Ceramic Cultural Park. I mean, Peter Wolkos won there, so when I was accepted, I was like, "Wow, okay, I can get to be a little part of this large, amazing history." It has three different components. There's a ceramic facilities for residents that they come from all over the world, and the international environment to me was outstanding. It was amazing and inspiring on a daily basis. And there's a museum, and there's also a research center. So basically, my weekly routine, it was working in the studio, work in the studio, work in the studio, go to the museum sometimes, go for a walk, and then visit the research center every week, where I had access to a library, not only of Blaze's experiment, but also I had access to digital fabrication tools. So the large plotter, there's a 3D printer, there was a laser cutter. So what I loved is this back and forth of accessing the tools, going back to the studio, testing, see what works, see what doesn't work, go back and do it all over again. So that was exciting. And the environment and the staff was fantastic and supportive. So.
Yeah. Did you already know how to use things like the plotter from your work before in graphic design, or did they
I
teach you
think
how to do it?
Yeah, I think I self-taught myself how to use all of these tools, like from 3D printer to laser cutter. I mean, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but I think I think they're possible to, even if, I wasn't formally trained on that. I think they're very accessible for everyone.
Yeah, that's good to know. Since
Mhm.
I hope everyone in this room and on Zoom knows that we're about to get a suite of this kind of digital production
It's
equipment. So we're
exciting.
really excited about that. Yeah. Does anyone in the room or on Zoom have a question? Diana has a question.
I have one. I wondered if in the future you see your role as being a teacher or a sculptor or a production person.
Did you hear that?
Oh, do you mind repeating? Thanks.
Okay, she asked if you see your role in the future as being a teacher, a production artist, or
a fine artist.
or a sculptor. Yeah.
I don't know yet. I love teaching. I really love teaching, but I think I wouldn't be able to do that full time. So I think maybe a combination of those, and also I don't consider myself a production potter because I'm not gonna be able to with the type of work and the type of focus that I need. I think I am a small batch production potter. Maybe that's how I will identify myself. But I think I'll definitely have to continue to do that, coupled somehow, or perhaps with some opportunity in teaching and maybe some installation and sculptural work. So maybe the answer is all of the above.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, I find that that's what most artists are, kind of all of the above, right?
Mhm.
I know very few people who only stay in one of those lanes.
I have a question. How are you applying color to your pieces? The ones downstairs are all black and white. So
Mhm.
obviously the clay body could be white, and is the black painted on or is it applied in another way?
Yeah, so I tried a number of different ways. The pieces that you have, they've worked on a dark clay body with white slip application. And when I was in Japan, I don't have photos of it, but they have a green clay body, which
Mean,
is
wow.
yeah. So, and I'm sure there's a number of different where there's a number of different colors, but I think I'm still looking and exploring. I think the clay body color might be a little bit limiting for me right now. So I think next I'm gonna explore either applying layers of colors regardless of the clay body color.
Mhm, mhm.
But I definitely, to answer your question, I definitely my interest is contrast. So I'm definitely, and that's why some of the wood fire pieces, they work for me in a way that I was able to maintain the contrast between the surface patterns and the clay body, in ways that generally wood fire tends to obliterate all of them with ash and whatnot. But in soda kilns and very low ash wood kilns, I find that I'm still able to maintain the contrast that I'm seeking in my work.
So,
Do you usually explore one new idea at a time, or are you able to kind of have multiple different directions going and like working with lots of different ideas and explorations at once?
I think if I understand the question, focusing on one idea or multiple ideas, I think it's a combination. I definitely love to explore a variety of ideas, but also I would like to be able to complete that iteration process that I mentioned before. So, for example, right now,
oh,
I am starting to. Uh-oh.
doesn't happen very
Oh,
often.
I'm back.
Oh, you're back now. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
You were saying something
Sorry
really
about that.
profound right when you went away.
I don't know
Okay.
when I lost you or when
Oh,
I.
right at the beginning of whether you work on one thing or multiple ideas. Yeah.
I think multiple. I think what I noticed is for example, Japan, I use that time just to work on new work. And I really focus on creating new forms. And then when I came back to the United States, I took those forms that I've approved and started to like making them and submitting them to shows or to galleries, while at the same time I continue to work on new forms. So for example, now I've never done uh, teapot. So right now I'm starting to design and prototyping new teapot. But the basis, for example, fun fact, the basis focus happened in Japan while I noticed while attending some local craft markets that the local audience they weren't interested in cups whatsoever. And and I thought that maybe okay, because there's this big tradition of chawan and me, and so maybe my cups didn't fit. But everybody loved vases or platters for sushi or serving. So I was like, well, okay, good challenge. I'm gonna focus on vases. So I started designing 20 different vases, and then eventually I focus and narrow in on some few elements. So, I think I'm flexible. Definitely want to continue to develop new forms, as well as repeating them. But I think to me, the challenge is to continue to design new patterns and new forms.
It sounds like you prototype a whole bunch of different things and then you narrow it down as you go, which is
Yeah.
it's a good technique, I would think. We have another question.
It looks like most of your laser printing and the like is for transfers and masks. Is it possible to do that, to do laser printing or 3D printing directly on a clay piece?
I think it's a very interesting possibility. I have only started to scratch the surface of that opportunity, but I think with a laser cutter, etching on clay is definitely possible. I haven't started that exploration, but I know it's exciting and possible. And in terms of 3D printing, I think more in the terms of maybe creating 3D printing tools for surface decoration. So it could be very similar to when I showed those laser cut flat patterns. With 3D printing, you could actually create some impression tools that they are round, right? Like 360. So you can make like rollers, or you can make like all sorts of tools that then eventually they can be applied to clay. So I think both of those options, there's so much potential and excitement for exploration.
Great. Who else has a question? Diana, another question.
Are you inspired, do you think, more by urban environments than rural or country or nature? Is there an urban focus, having come from Rome?
Oh, did you hear, having come from Rome, do you think you're more inspired by urban environments or country, rural environments?
I think it's a question that I ask myself often. I don't have the final answer yet, but I definitely love and cherish nature and tranquility and contact with nature and animals. And that's definitely one of my, wish list whenever I'm gonna settle somewhere and set up my studio. But I also do enjoy so much the urban living, like the cultural aspect, like the concerts, the music, the theater, the movie theaters, and the community. I think to me is also very important, just really being in close contact with other artists or living within the proximity of other artists, whether in a remote rural area or in a city environment. I wish there was a place where I could have both, but I don't know yet.
Well, there's places in Philadelphia where you could have them. Trying to get her to move to Philadelphia. Speaking of animals, I have to say that looking at your pieces downstairs, I was walking around with a little kid, and when you're with children, you think more about, what are they going to relate to? So we were talking about zebras and giraffes when we were looking at your work. I know you said that the water pattern, and I can see that's a repetitive theme in your work, but is that intentional, the reference to sort of almost animal skin like features?
Yeah, interesting. So the answer is probably no. And what I think I'm sure there's something innate that comes through. Somebody recently looked at a recent pattern that I designed and said, "Oh, that's very African inspired." And I was like, I didn't do it intentionally. Well, technically, cultural appropriateness. My parents were born in Africa, so technically that would be okay. But the intention wasn't necessarily there. And I think I'm sure that there's influence here and there that I'll be able to dig in one day in the original source of it. But I think at the core, what I can share right now is that for all these years that I've been working at a creative slash corporate job where I always had to be creative, but at the same time, it always had to fit certain criterias and either the creative brief or client needs or client feedback, and always like kind of like having this tension between the creative but also the practical delivery of the work within all of those guidelines. Right now I'm free. I do not have a client that tells me, yeah, but this like changes, or I don't have like a particular, well, delivery, okay, questionable. But I think right now I'm really finding that freedom in using my, I don't know, I guess intuition, and designing something that is aesthetically pleasing to me in terms of both patterns but also form, and and really just intuitively designing something that appeals to my aesthetic.
Mm.
And I found that it in this point in my life very exciting and liberating in a way.
I mean, and sometimes I think in a way when we are our most free and sort of thinking about nature and allowing natural patterns to come through, these things are all, and that a pattern that's inspired by nature is going to kind of look like something that's on an animal or in nature. So I love that you're keying into the freedom that allows you to like project your interest in nature without even really thinking about it. So that's lovely.
Yeah.
I would push back a little against the idea that you are totally free, because you're still choosing to make functional art, right? So there still is a brief in a way. Somebody has to be able to drink out of this cup, pour out of a pitcher. Do you ever think about that? Like maybe are there any future projects in mind that don't have a user?
Yeah, and you're totally right. Yes, that portion I didn't address it, but absolutely, I think that's they need to serve the ultimate function of being usable. And of course, there's the option of creating sculptural elements that they might not have a use. For me, what's exciting is the combination of those two. I'm really interested in sculpture, and I'm really interested in functional work, and to create a design object for a daily use, and to bring an element of sculptural element, but adding some functionality to it. So I think maybe an hybrid between the two is interest that I would like to continue to pursue. Like, for example, the picture that I showed before, it's probably not the most common, I guess, form, but to me, it fulfills some of the, there's some allusion to architecture and lines and contrast, but still, it pours really well. So, it's like, wow, if I can achieve that, that's amazing.
Well, and I mean, my personal opinion is that sculptural forms that can be used are almost the highest form of art, because you really get to have it as part of your life, which I think is really special. And when there's a sculptural thing like a picture that it might not be an everyday object, it's still, you bring it out when there's something special happening, and that is yet another layer of meaning that is attached to those things, which is great. Does do you have a question? No. Okay. We were talking about asking you what's next as to help wrap up.
Yeah, well, what's next? I think we give it away a little bit. I'm gonna head back to Japan for a longer period of time. This time I was very humbled to have been invited as only one of 5 artists per year to be able to have a full fellowship to go back. So I'm gonna stay until next spring. And after that, the plan is to find a permanent location and finally get all of my boxes out of storage and my studio from the road to a local location, to a permanent, hopefully permanent location, and get a dog. And
There's a dog in the room with us right now.
I've had the dogs all my life, and like this traveling has been amazing, but also I've been missing having a dog companion. So yeah, look forward to.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that'll be nice. Well, we hope you come and visit us here in Philadelphia. We're really enjoying having your work on view. And we're excited to see, yeah, when you get back from Japan and all of these things coming together. But thank you so much for your time today, Yael.
Thank you so much, and thank you to you and all your staff and all the people who took the time today to attend. I'm very, very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.